My name's Steve Mitchell. I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here. I appreciate the invitation and the warm welcome. My sobriety date is May 26, 1975, and I'm a member of the principals group of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's been an eventful week. It's been an eventful month. You sent up two speakers for us this month, Lawrence and Mary. And then Monday night I heard Aaron. Wednesday night, where are you at, Feather? Him. And last night, Robert Fry, all powerful talks. And also on Wednesday night, Jerry always gives me a medallion every year, that jazzed up one of Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson. This year he gave me a different one. It's gold. Somebody asked me if it was all gold. I don't know about all that. Might look into selling it if it is. Anyway, I had this thought. I think it's appropriate to the time, although it doesn't make much sense because we're a room full of people that have found a way out. But I always think about this around this time of year. You know, that I thought for years that Bill Wilson said this, but I think Bernard Smith said it. He helped us, wrote a lot of stuff for Alcoholics Anonymous. I think he was a non-alcoholic attorney and did a lot of stuff for us. But there's a great quote. It said that, lest we never forget, Alcoholics Anonymous is made up of a society of colossal failures, transformed by the grace of a loving God. You know, that's not bad. It's not a bad way of looking at it. I was thinking today about all the people that have helped me over the years, and thought about, Keith Lewis. I mean, the stories. I mean, I ain't run into many people that led a combat patrol in a war zone in a blackout. He did. He was smaller than me. I had a girlfriend for a while, and I didn't have any business having her, but I still think about it now. Nevertheless, she used to run around in her underwear, and she'd jump up and down and say, I'm bigger than your sponsor. I weigh more than your sponsor. Anyway, I think about him and Tom Ivester. It's how I got to North Carolina. Tom brought me here, and later when Keith got sick and died, and Tom had left the system, he became my sponsor. So I thought about the people that helped me, and I also thought about the people I've known over the years that didn't get out. I think sometimes it seems like we see the same people that don't catch on. There's actually some people that are still trying to get sober, that were trying to get sober when I got to North Carolina in 1989. They literally are. So we have those people, but the overwhelming majority of alcoholics never get close to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Never get a DWI, never, just live lives, I think that commercial said, of quiet desperation. But I thought about a guy, when I got sober, there was two guys in the group named Bud. They called, both of them were small like me. One of them they called Big Bud, and the other one they called Little Bud. Well, I figured out they called Big Bud because he was the guy packing the power. But he slept a lot during the daytime. He was probably older than I am now when I got sober. But we used to go over to his house after meetings. I didn't work much the first year. I was very sick. And I look back on it now. What his wife, Alice, would get us. She just died recently. I think she's almost 100 years old. She was quite a bit younger than Bud. She outlived him by a long ways. But she would get us like cookies or something to eat and hang out a little while and visit, and then she'd go to bed. And when I look back on it now, what Bud did is he would hold court all night long. And there were times I remember walking home in the morning, and the sun was coming up. I was walking to my great aunt's house. But he held court on any topic. There wasn't any topic off limits. We'd talk about the steps, we'd talk about God, talk about alcoholism, all kinds of alcohol, talk about sex, anything you wanted to talk about, Bud would hold court on. That's what it seems like from this vantage point. It's probably been 20 or 25 years ago. One of the guys I sobered up with, he came in May 2nd, I came in May 26th. I gave him the name Big Harold. He was almost 6 foot tall, and he weighed 116 pounds. He looked like a prisoner of war. And he said that the first time he saw me, he told his wife, there's one that's really hurting. So I don't know what I must have looked like, but probably 20 or 25 years ago, he said that, everything that old man told us has held all these years. Everything he said has stood the test of time, and that's absolutely true. So I got this goofy little story. I don't think I've ever told it here, but there's this crazy story about this young couple who bought this beat-up house out in the country. And this is analogous to the power of the people of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, there's that great line in the big book that says that we shared in a common peril. And Bill Wilson uses the word peril for alcoholism. He likes to mess around with words because he had that English teacher told him don't use the same word all the time. So he used the word peril. We shared in the same peril, but that would never have held us together as we're held together now. What's held us together is a common solution. The power of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's what we gather up around tonight. I think Jim's going to get a medallion, maybe some other people. But what we're really celebrating at any anniversary is the power of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not to negate what people did. People paid tremendous dues for that, put in a lot of action, done a lot of stuff for that gift, but nevertheless, we're celebrating the power of Alcoholics Anonymous. But anyway, this story I wanted to tell, it's a goofy little story, but it draws lines to the people of Alcoholics Anonymous. There was this young couple bought this beat-up old house out in the country, and they started working on it. And there was this old couple, when they got out of church out in the country, they'd take a long route home every Sunday, and they started watching this, and over time, this young couple were out there working, and they turned it into something that was looking better and better. It was overrun with weeds, and it's just typical stuff. You would never catch me working on something like that now. There's people in here that know that. Randy swears I called him over to my house to change a light. That's not true. He was already there. And also it was one of those those tube-like things. And Joey ain't here, but I broke off a light bulb a while back, so I called Joey. I wanted him to say he'd come over and change it. So he was trying to tell me how to do it. I said, look, Joey, I ain't. Listen, I'm scared of electricity. I ain't reaching up in there. He finally said, I'll come over tomorrow and change it. I said, good. But anyway, they're working on this house, and after a long time, this old guy finally told his wife, he said, I'm going to stop one of these Sundays and talk to that young couple. And so they did, and they were visiting. It went very well, and congratulated them on their work. And so the older couple were getting ready to leave and go home. And the old man said to the young couple, he said, ain't it wonderful what God can do? And the young man looked at him and said, yeah, it is, but you got to remember what this place looked like last year at this time when God had it all by himself. Well, the point of that is that you know, we read every meeting we go to that no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. Most of us believe that. But when you listen to somebody tell their story at a podium of Alcoholics Anonymous, they always point to people. They point to the people who got them out. And if you ever wonder about the genius of our founders, if you ever wonder what somebody needs to know when they come to Alcoholics Anonymous, they need to know exactly what that says, what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. They probably wouldn't, I don't imagine I believed all of that the first time I heard it, but I must have believed enough of it to get back. So that's what we're celebrating tonight. I think Feather said, I think he said this Wednesday night, all of us heard this from Tom Ivester, but I told the lady that was, I don't know what she said, something about the meeting, and I said, well, you can believe you won't be any smarter when we're done here tonight. That's for sure. I wonder myself what I'm going to say. One thing that happens at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting is that no matter whatever happens, if I'm in the meeting, I tighten my own hold on whatever it is I have. One of the things I learned in the spiritual life a long time ago is it's impossible to give anything away. Whatever you send out comes back. Trash out, trash back. Love out, love back. It's a bad principle that doesn't work both ways. You know, it says in the book that the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, has the power to actually kill. So that law works both ways. I don't even have to help anybody. I don't have any power to help anybody, but the effort to help somebody visits the gift on me. So there's only two things we do in Alcoholics Anonymous as far as I know. I've said this all over North America, and nobody's never argued the point. Nobody's ever corrected it, and I never had a sponsor that challenged it. As far as I know, of all the hundreds of things we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, everything we do to stay sober or help the alcoholic who still suffers. Everything we do comes back under that and draws straight lines to that. That's the job. That's the job description. So what I'm going to try to do is try to share my experience, strength, and hope in a general way, and let it go at that. That'll be the day. Anyway, I grew up in alcoholism. I come from a long line of alcoholics. Ain't many of those people ever said they were alcoholics. It's a funny thing to me. My dad hated Alcoholics Anonymous. They probably wore out one car taking him around to places to try to make him quit drinking. And he hated AA from the first time, and he wasn't any closer at the end of his life to believing he was an alcoholic. He told my aunt, he told one of his sisters, if anything would make a man drink, Alcoholics Anonymous would do it. Hated AA. And the first summer I was sober, he said, the problem with you is you went from one extreme to the other. I didn't know enough to say. If I'd have known what I was doing, I would have said, I think that's the idea, Dad. I'm drunk and now I'm not drunk. I'm pretty sure that's the idea. But I didn't know what I was doing. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous at 25, almost 26 years old. I was hemorrhaging blood. Whenever I vomited, blood came out. Went to the bathroom, blood came out. My feet were all swollen up, was turning colors. Couldn't keep anything down. There was a lady bringing in beer for me to try to hold down. It was taking a long time to keep down. And anybody that's been through that knows you can't get well if you can't get it to stay down. There's some other self-evident truths. The people that tried that actually sent for help from me were a permanent party in Bill's Bar. And I believe then and now, everybody that was drinking in Bill's. You ever seen a bar like that where everybody in there could go to AA and you wouldn't have missed a person? You didn't need to check anybody at the door to see if they were alcoholic. If they were in Bill's Bar, you could get in there by mistake, but you wouldn't stay in there by mistake. You had to be serious. It wasn't a place that people stopped for a couple beers after work. But AA would be a very different place if the people who got some of us in here would have got in here themselves. And it would also be a very, very different place if the non-alcoholics who got many of us in here. So I grew up in alcoholism, and all the men on both sides of my family were alcoholics, serious alcoholics. The women, not so much. They were to come later. I have a sister who almost drank herself to death. Plenty of dope too, Amy. Amy likes to talk about crack from the podium, so I always throw a couple of those at her. But my aunts, my mom, they might have drank a beer or something, but they weren't alcoholics. But anyway, it was obvious. The thing I remember, I understand what Bill Wilson said. I would never argue with this. That the number one offender is resentments. But if I were to label the illness of alcoholism and could only use one word, the word I would use is fear. I think I was born full of fear. I think I was born confused. I think I was born angry. I was probably sober 5 years before I found out how mad I was. I just experienced everything as fear. But I remember being terrified in kindergarten. I remember being scared to death. They thought I was a boy wonder because I could read really good. My last granddaughter just turned 13 years old, and I watched my kids and my grandchildren learn how to read. As far as I know, I never learned how to read. I just came into the world knowing how to read. So I could read out loud really good in front of other people. I often knew what words meant, that I didn't know how I knew that. I just knew words. I could read really good. I've always been a big reader. Even the drunkest of the drunk in my family, we've all been big readers. Dr. Bob said he read an hour a day of his life, drunk or sober. I believe what Dr. Bob said. The only thing I can say is he wasn't as drunk as I was if he was reading an hour a day. But here's what happened to me. They thought I was really smart. And I started school when I was 4 years old. And in the 4th grade, they introduced a thing called long division. Well, I never have learned how to do long division. I mean, I've gotten kind of arrogant about it over the years. I've wondered now what anybody would want to know how to do it for. But exactly what my ex-wife learned when she was, when she used to work, worked in all the schools, and then she got a teacher's certificate. And when she was getting that teacher's certificate, she took some gifted education classes, and exactly what happened to me is what they said often happens. When somebody can't do something, they don't believe them. So that what they did is they took me to the principal's office. It wasn't adversarial. They were very kind. I remember, it's been a long time ago. I'm going to be 75 pretty quick. And so it was a long time ago in the 4th grade. But the principal of that school was an elegant, regal old lady that gave her whole life to that little elementary school. It's a town of 25,000 people outside Omaha. My teacher was in there and another woman, probably some kind of a counselor, and what they wanted to know is why I wouldn't do that long division. Well, I wanted to know too. Why, if I'm so smart, why can't I do this? It didn't make any sense to me. And so later I was up. Now, I don't want to brag about this, but it is the truth. I'm a former ping pong champion, VA psych ward, Lincoln, Nebraska. I remained undefeated in the psych ward. I lost one game, and I had my headband standing in, and after that, I remained undefeated. But they had a new head doctor in there, a young man who had, a lot of his PhD was in right brain, left brain. And so I'd already figured a lot of this out by then. I'd been in the military, I'd been to Vietnam. I mean, I was a grown man by now, and so I'd figured out a lot of this just through time. But he said that whatever was wrong with me was a small part of my brain. I could have been born that way, like a pole didn't touch or something. I could have been born that way, or I could have been dropped. But he said, you just need to stay away from anything mechanical. So there's more than one. I think there's several people in this room who have changed a tire for me, so they know this is true. If I get a flat tire, I'm down until you get there. I mean, and then it's been a horrible run with this. I went off in the military when I was a child. They sent my friend to prison. They let me go in the military. And I cheated on the test to get in there, paid a dishonest recruiter, and went off to the military. So when I got out of basic training, they sent me to Wichita Falls, Texas to learn how to work on airplanes. Can you imagine that? I mean, they had just come out with those disposable razors at that time. And I was so glad to get one of those. I'd had a couple, 3 razors I'd thrown away. I couldn't figure out how to get the blade out of them or in it. So they put me in that school, and I'm new, and this is like 1968. You got to wonder about the wisdom of this. They got us all together and said, you can go anywhere in Wichita Falls, Texas this weekend, but you can't go on Flood Street. The reason you can't go on Flood Street is the base commander put it off limits with an executive order. Well, you know what I did? I got drunk and went down on Flood Street, find out why they don't want you down there. Long story, I got put out of that school. I couldn't have made it through that school if they'd have put one person on there just to train me. And what they did is they sent me to your place. They sent me to Little Rock, Arkansas. And they might as well have put a hog in a corn patch. I'd never seen anything like that. I mean, as far as you could, now this couldn't have been true, but it looked like as far as you could see, they had all these girls in little bitty minis and boots and saying things like, y'all come on now, and the country music was blaring all the time. I was there 1 year, got arrested for public intoxication, minor in possession, and drunk driving. Now, about 3 years ago, I started sponsoring a special operations soldier. It's at Fort Bragg. Talked to him yesterday. He's an E8. He's been in there about 18 years. He told me that the Army is putting people out of active duty with 17 or 18 years of honorable service on first offense drunk driving. If that's true, that's reprehensible. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, I'd have never made it through, but that's what he said's going on. I'm sure he didn't make it up. But anyway, what happened to me with that drunk driving, it's like when I look back on my life, drunk and sober, people have always ridden to the rescue. I was in trouble, so I went over and signed this piece of paper that said I wanted to go to Vietnam. And at that time, they'd move you pretty fast. Well, anyway, I was set to get out. Amy, I'll just leave it at crack with you. I won't do this to you. But there's a thing called a 3912 discharge. So they called me in and offered me a 3912 general discharge, which essentially, it's tidied up a little bit, but essentially it says you're a misfit. You got to go somewhere else. Well, they called me in and said I could either take my shipment to Vietnam or I could get out on a 3912. And the guy that worked it out said, I talked to the major, and he said, you're going to have to do one of them. You can't stay here. And the other thing is, they had just come out with this thing that said you couldn't get more than 30 days leave before you went to Southeast Asia. And he said, now the major did say he'd sign one for you for 43 days. So they wanted to get me out of there. So I went off to Vietnam. It was January of 1970. And I think I learned, by looking back, I learned a great deal about the progression of the illness of alcoholism long before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. When I talked about it, or probably more poignantly, when I heard people talking about progression, what I heard them talking about was somebody they saw last year trying to get sober, and maybe they had their family or they still had their job or their teeth or whatever it was, and now they're back again this year, and whatever they were hanging on to by a thread is gone. That's what I understood progression to be. That's certainly the progression of the drinking part of the illness. But there's also the rage, there's the isolation, there's the fear, there's the blaming others, the loneliness of alcoholism. I don't know if other kinds of loneliness is worse than alcoholism, but it's a lot different. The loneliness of alcoholism ain't got nothing to do with the proximity of people. You can be alone in the arms of a loving woman. You can be alone in your own family at Christmas time. I suspect AA is a very lonely place if you haven't gotten across that divide. My old sponsor, Keith Lewis, used to talk about laying in bed next to a woman he loved and he thought loved him. Both of them stiff as a board with their legs touching, neither one of them able to say anything because he'd been drunk one more time and ruined everything. So that loneliness of alcoholism ain't got nothing to do with the proximity of people. So the more my alcoholism progressed, the more all that stuff was going on. So anyway, I can't see that clock. What time is it?
7:30.
I got about another couple hours, I guess. I'll be in here all by myself. There's a place in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, where it says that the drinking career of every alcoholic is characterized by something hilarious and something tragic. Now, I'm going to tell you something that was funny at the time. If you don't like this story, I don't know what to tell you. Thump it up, I guess. I didn't know you could get in trouble for this story. I swear I didn't know it. I told it untold numbers of times before I ever got in trouble with it. I got in trouble with it in Rhode Island and in Taos, New Mexico. Now, most of the time when something embarrassing happens, you're glad your sponsor's not there. When I got in trouble in Rhode Island, I was really glad Tom was there, because if I could get this story past Tom, which Tom had heard this story numbers of times, but if this story would fly past Tom Ivester, anybody that really knew him very well, you might not get that from just knowing him. Like, he came here every year and talked. You might not catch on to that, but he was a moralist. Tom was absolutely a moralist, and if I could get this story past him. Well, anyway, here's the story. This happened in Spokane, Washington. I'm back from Vietnam, and my alcoholism's pretty far gone. I had this woman with me. It wouldn't be fair to say she was unattractive. She, however, was old. And I told this story one night in Decatur, Alabama, and there was a lady sitting right down in the front row where Kevin's sitting, and she said, "You mean mature, don't you?" I said, "No." No, I don't mean mature. So anyway, got arrested. Well, I remember pulling up at this bar, it's out in the country, in a big, long white car. It wasn't mine, but I was driving it legally. It wasn't a stolen car. And so we went in the bar, and Sandy and Pam like this story. My wife hates it. We went in this bar, and a couple hours later we came out, very drunk, got in a white car and left. It wasn't a white car we drove to the bar. It was another white car, and I got arrested for auto theft and drunk driving. It took me a long time to figure out what had happened. Well, they took us to this little bitty cowtown jail, and it's the only time they had her and I in the same cell. And she had this jacket of mine on. It had dope in both pockets. Amy, it's another one for you. Amy likes to talk about crack from the podium. You know she does. But anyway, this was a very strange evening. It took a long time to get figured out what had happened. I mean, how could I be arrested for a stolen car when it's not stolen? It took a long time to figure out what had happened. Well, the next morning they let us out of jail, and it's amazing because the only thing I got a ticket for leaving a motor vehicle unattended. I guess the benevolent part of this story is I left the car I drove there for the guy that was driving the one I took. But he was driving on suspension, so he had to get his kids to come and get it. So the whole thing was a mess. Well, they let us out of jail the next morning, and this woman had on, I'll never forget this as long as I live, this woman had on these little bitty white shorts. About half her butt was coming out the bottom. It was rough. And I don't know why I did this, but she was walking ahead of me, and the patrolman was talking to me. You know how they'll talk to you, and at my size, he's poking me like this, and he's saying that she has to drive, you're too drunk. And I'm sure I'm agreeing with him, so we're walking. So he tells me to get going. So I start walking. I'm probably from here to that kitchen behind her. Now, I don't know why I did this, but I just stopped. And I turned around and looked at the patrolman. And when I did, our eyes locked. You know how your eyes will lock with somebody in a meeting or a restaurant? The eyes just locked. Like that, and that patrolman went. And I thought, buddy, those are my thoughts. Absolutely. And now that story says as much about me as it does about her. It's just a story. And that woman up in Rhode Island, I've been telling that story for years. Dave Cook said the story could fly too, as a matter of fact. But there was a rather large woman who didn't like the story. And Tom told me, he said, if you want to tell that story, don't pay any attention to that junk. And then he told me about, he was on the podium somewhere and he was just talking about his kids. He said, my son went into medicine and my daughter went bad on me and went into psychology. He said some psychologist attacked him after the meeting. So, share your experience. I was just glad he was there. And then I got in trouble in Taos, New Mexico for telling that story, but this rather rabid member of the committee, I think she was sober 16 years, she took care of that woman. But anyway, I didn't know you could it's just a story. But anyway, that was hilarious. Wasn't hilarious at the time, but I think about it as God Almighty. Something tragic. When I came back from Vietnam, my alcoholism has long progressed. Now, I'm not going to do a fifth step up here. It'd be inappropriate. It says in a general way. But my alcoholism was well progressed. And we'll just leave it at this. I was involved with some people they were outside the long arm of the law. My plan was to stay on the peripheral of all that till I finished out my time in the military and to become involved full-time with them. I've always been grateful that by the time that opportunity came, I was too far gone. By the time I got back to Washington State, I was a recovered member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But I came back to America in January of 1971. I stayed in Vietnam one day, actually January 23rd till January 23rd. In March of 1971, because of alcoholism and hatred and just because of the way I was living, I was a good bit responsible for the death of another person. Now, I don't think it would be honest or fair to say that didn't bother me, but what I told myself is that person got what they deserved because of what they had done. And one of the things that the spiritual life makes clear, the farther something is slammed down, the more vile it's going to be when it comes back up. So there's no free lunches. I mean, you can't do something to somebody else and hurt them without hurting yourself. You can be as miserable as you want in here, or you can be as happy as you want. I mean, you can have a life of service. I mean, there's probably no program in the world that allows us to decide our own fate as much as Alcoholics Anonymous. I know there's when you look at getting to pick your leaders, Alcoholics Anonymous is the place to do that. I had some management training one time that said if you work for a man or a woman you wouldn't hire, if the shoe was on the other foot, you're going to have trouble every time. You can do it, but you're going to have trouble. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we get to pick our leaders. So it's been my great pleasure to follow some absolute spiritual giants. But I got out of the military, and I wasn't never charged with anything. I got out of the military. I don't think I could be charged with anything. When I finally told somebody about it, that's the first thing they asked, is this something you can be charged with? No, just charged spiritually. But anyway, I crept on out of the military in the summer of 1972. Everybody that's been in the military, Frank, I think, is retired from the military. Bill, where are you at? Got the Vietnam hat and the Marine Corps hat. And there's probably other people. Jerry's been in the military. Everybody that's been in the military knows about the power of chaplains. Medic Randy is a paratrooper. I even had Randy checked out. He's told me so much stuff that's suspicious. I never could figure out if he was really a paratrooper or not. And I had Top Soldier check him out. John Blanding, who's a friend of this group, who's gone now to the big meeting. But Anyway, there was a very kind ENT surgeon who kept me from getting kicked out of the military. What he did is just band-aid me up to the time I got out. I actually drove a car to Illinois for him. He had too many cars. And he single-handedly stood in front of the tank and kept me from getting kicked out of the military. He diagnosed me one time with some kind of a very rare disease, and they put me on a floor by myself. I was the only one up there. They had me in a tent. And people thought I was toxic. I'm just up there drunk. But I made amends to him, and a 3 years ago, I got to thinking it might be nice to. His daughter is the head of a major clinic outside of St. Louis. She followed her daddy's steps and became an ENT surgeon. So I just called out there to talk to somebody, and the woman who answered the phone, I said, I'm the recipient of Dr. James Viggy's. Jim Round, you found that for me. Remember that? You found his address for me at the hospital when I was going to make amends to him years ago. But I called out there and I said, do you know Dr. Jim Viggy? And the woman answered the phone. She said, I ought to. He's my grandpa. But he had passed, and so but nevertheless, he kept me from getting kicked out of the military. So here's what happened. In the summer of 1972, I got out of the military and I came back to Nebraska. The idea was short thrift, and I was going to go back to Spokane, Washington, and become involved with those people full time. They were all driving those Fleetwoods and Eldorados, and said they'll put me in a Fleetwood Cadillac and drive around. All you got to do is pony up and get on the job with them. But anyway, 6 months after I got out of the military, I became homeless for the first time. And I'm going to try to get through this really quick. It's easy to get stuck in Bill's Bar, but there's one big difference between drinking in North Carolina and drinking in Nebraska. I work with a lot of new people, so do other people in this room. You know that people can get very drunk in North Carolina, but there's probably, I would say there's 15 or 20 bars in Nebraska to every bar in North Carolina. There's bars everywhere. I'm going to Nebraska in July. I have one sister that stayed in Nebraska, and her husband lived in a town of less than 300 people. There's 3 bars in that town. Bars everywhere. I sobered up in Chapter 5 in Fremont, Nebraska. There's a bar on each side. I wasn't allowed to go in either one anyway. Right down on the other side of the street was a place called Bill's Bar. And have you ever seen a bar like that where everybody in there could be in AA? You could back a farm truck up and put everybody in there. Now, Bill had made his fortune, a legitimate fortune, in the garbage and septic tank business. And he bought that bar as a toy for his drunken wife, Phyllis. And we had some colorful people in that bar. We had a guy named Vibrator Hartman. And Vibrator got drunk one New Year's Eve and burned up in a fire. We had a guy named Rodney Montani, and Rodney got drunk, got in a fight with a guy in a wheelchair and tipped him over. And you know how people get louder and louder when they're drunk? The drunker Rodney would get, the quieter he would get. And eventually his lips would move, but no words would come out. We had a guy named Leonard Larson. Leonard had no neck. His head sat right on his shoulders. And what Leonard would do is Leonard would get drunk and crawl around on his hands and knees and perform feats of strength. He'd lift bar stools up over his head. He used to get me to jump off bar stools onto his stomach. But the 2 most colorful characters we had come in that bar were 2 brothers named Billy and Tommy Walker. They showed up about the same time I did. They said they were from Texas. Who knows where they were from? I mean, they might have been from Texas. But I'm a beer drinker at that time, but I'll drink anything. But at that time, I could literally drink beer for 24 or 30 hours. I'd be drunk, but I could remember stuff. I'd drive a car. I could talk to people. But you let me take 1 drink of whiskey or 1 drink of Mad Dog or whatever with that beer, I just never remember what happened. So when the Walker boys showed up, Billy Walker drank dry gin and chased it with squirt. And Tommy Walker drank bar whiskey and chased it with water. So when I started drinking with them, I started drinking at dry gin, chasing it with squirt. Now, this is the kind of brains you had in Bill's Bar at this time. This is what Billy Walker told me. He said, the way we're drinking this gin, he said, there's 2 things you got to remember. He said, always get a chaser, put the gin in a shot glass and get a chaser, a squirt. As soon as you swallow that gin, it's nasty and it can gag you. You drink the squirt. Anybody who's drank any dry gin knows he's telling the truth. If you get a good whiff of that or a good slug of that and you're sober and that gin's hot, it'll just send chills throughout you. You got to be about half drunk to drink it. And the other thing he said is you got to start to use a lot of pepper on your food because this gin can hurt your liver. Now, that's what he said. I ain't making that up. Now, and his brother Tommy Walker drank bar whiskey and chased it with water. Well, one of the reasons I like to drink with him is I had a big mouth when I was drinking. There wasn't anything going to happen to me in Bill's bar, but sometimes we'd wander off. Now, Billy Walker never was any bigger than I am right now, but he would attack people. He looked like that dog on the Greyhound bus. He'd attack people and knock them out. That'd be the end of them. And the other reason is he's just one of those people. I've seen a lot of guys, you have too, that could get women, but I've seen here's what Billy Walker would do. He would just go wherever he was at, and then pretty soon there would be women around there. Well, as I look back on it now, I must have just been drunk, not stupid. Because my plan was, I'll stay here with you, Billy, and possibly get in on some of the overflow. Now, I don't know whatever happened to those guys. When I first met, you know how somebody tells you something? This happens all the time working with newcomers. They tell you something that's plausible. It's possible, it's time appropriate and everything, but it probably ain't true. When I first met Billy Walker, now he told me he was just out of the 101st Airborne. He was the right age, but when I looked at him, I said, this dude's coming from a prison somewhere. I mean, there's symptoms to that. So I don't know what happened to him. I was in Waco, Texas one time, and I was the Friday night speaker, and I saw this woman. You know how people come through the line? This roundup was right down the road from the George W. Bush Ranch. But this young woman was coming through the line, and nobody was going to back up the line on her. She was about to knock people down. And she got up there, and she said, you ain't going to believe this. I said, what? She said, I know those Walker boys. I said, you got to be kidding. She said, oh, no, I know them. I used to hang out with their little sister. And I said, what do they look like? Well, she told me exactly what they look like. And then she said that when she last saw them in the early 80s, they said when their daddy drove a tractor trailer around the country, and when he was in Texas, they were even drunker. So I don't know how that could be, but anyway, it's a worthless enough story. Anyway, what happened is I became homeless, and Memorial Day weekend, 1975, you know, the Memorial Day Monday is always the state and federal holiday. I woke up at 2 a.m. I had 2 bottles of wine, but I couldn't find them. Anybody in here ever hide a bottle from themselves? That's a revolting development. You got booze, but you can't find it. Now, the guy that drank it's dead. I don't think that wine killed him. Probably didn't help him any, but I didn't know what had happened. So I asked this guy I was drinking with, I said, well, what happened? He said, well, we were riding around with Richard. Richard's nerves are bad. That couldn't be argued. Richard's nerves were always bad. I've always loved that saying black people have, Cheryl, of going up beside your head. There'd be about 2 or 3 words exchanged, and Richard would go up beside somebody's head. But we were riding around with Richard, apparently, and this guy told me, he said, you wouldn't shut up, so Richard hit you. I said, Richard hit me? He said, yeah, hit you right in the mouth, hard, too. I said, what did I do? He said, you started crying. Anyway, I don't know how long this was after May 26th. I do know I woke up at 2 a.m. on May 26th. I do know from then until right now, I've never had anything to drink, any alcohol. And sometime within that next few days, maybe a week, 10 days, I don't think it was any longer than that, my great aunt invited me to come and live with her. Now, my great aunt was very dignified, elegant, regal even, old lady. If she were a young woman today, she'd be a physician or an attorney or something. She, lifelong student. She spoke English, obviously. She spoke Spanish fluently. She spoke German fluently, and she was a lifelong student of Latin because of her love of words. She was interested in, I think you call it word derivative, how words come together. She was fascinated by that. And she said, I have someone in mind who will take you to Alcoholics Anonymous if you will go. And I can tell you, my life has never been the same since. We've been talking about this week. It can sound too orderly when you talk about the steps. It's become more orderly, but it was very chaotic. It was very chaotic, and I didn't work much the first year. I was very sick. I was overwhelmed by life. I didn't think I would ever be able to do anything again. I went back to the way I was before I started drinking. You know, I think we'd all acknowledge that alcoholism is an abnormal reaction to alcohol. It's also an abnormal reaction to sobriety. That's the problem. You ain't much of an alcoholic if you quit drinking and everything becomes fine and you ride off into the sunset, everything's all right. Because once you get hit, all those obsessions that have went underground are flush right there now. So I started going to meetings on a daily basis, and I've always been really grateful to people I fell under the care of, because clearly they understood. As I look back now, here's what they told me, that what alcoholism means is you can't live with drinking and you can't live without drinking. Unfortunately, I've seen that up close and personal. I sponsored 2 people that have committed suicide sober. One, just in the last couple years, that was sober since January of 1989, killed himself. Used to come to this meeting. He's a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He was working with 3 people during the worst part of the pandemic, face to face. And then a guy a long time ago in Omaha. So, percentage-wise, most alcoholics that take their own life do that sober. I didn't have any problems when I was drunk. A lot of times I didn't even know I was there. So, the problems started, beginning. So slowly my life started to change. I went to meetings every day. What they told me was that if I wanted to cut to the chase on what Alcoholics Anonymous was, they said it's a way of life. If practiced as a way of life, all the jets of AA are in place at the same time, it makes drinking impossible. If any alcoholic could get drunk, I surely wouldn't say I can't. It's been helpful to me the last 3 years to really filter that thought. Make sure it's not just something I'm saying, because I've been saying for years that we're over-identified with meetings, that meetings are just one thing we do. Alcoholics Anonymous is a way of life. That's true, but meetings are critically important. They're a profound. I mean, we would be in even more trouble in Alcoholics Anonymous than we are had we not had Zoom. That's absolutely for sure. Anyway. My life started to change. I got a job doing lawn work, and then they put me in a junkyard to work. They made a guy give me a job in a junkyard. Terrible place for me to work. He'd send me to get a carburetor. I'd come back with a fender. And the clerk took me off there, put me on lawn work. I started a fire, had relations with his daughter. He wasn't fond of that. I mean, the whole thing was just a mess. I had no idea what I'm doing. And here's what happened. When I was this wouldn't happen today. I've had 3 major jobs in my sobriety. I didn't qualify for any of them. I didn't fill out an application for any of them. I was told, the guy, I went to work, when I was sober about 1.5 years, I became an officer of the court. I went to work with state probation in Nebraska. The guy was opening a clinic about 150 miles from where I got sober, and he said, you don't even need to tell anybody, because they're going to say it can't happen because they got all this stuff that you have to have. And he said, don't worry about it, I'll knock down all of that stuff. So in January of 1977, one Sunday I'm here fat, dumb, and happy, and Monday I became an officer of the court. That's how I came to North Carolina on a job. The first ex-convict in history to ever become a prison warden recruited me and brought me here in 1989. So everything that's happened to me in life is because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I guess you could, probably, I think I must be headed for the home stretch here. What time is it, Amy? 5 till? Okay. I think Kevin talked quite a while. I'm just going to, this thought. If you think about it like this, besides practicing the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous to the best of our ability, we don't have to do anything that's hinder or harming our fulfillment in life. It'll be removed on its own through the practice of these principles. We don't have to do anything to bring anything into our lives that's necessary for our fulfillment besides practice these principles. Now, that might necessitate a lot of stuff. Like if you can't, I sponsored a guy for 27 years. He wasn't able to learn how to read. He wasn't going to learn how to read. The idea is for him to have the best life he could have. He had the same stuff at stake that I have at stake or anybody else. But these principles carry the day, whatever they are. Alcoholics Anonymous is enough. I think Robert said that last night from the podium. There used to be a guy, he's still sober, over in Chesapeake. He used to say that Alcoholics Anonymous has everything we need to take us all the way to the wire. So, you've been very kind in listening. I'm going to close up on this thought. I'm going to Nebraska next month in early July. I have one uncle that's still living. My favorite uncle. I didn't like a lot of those people, but my favorite uncle. And I look back on it now as the clock turns on how prominent and what a large part he played in a miserable time and when we were kids. But he's in a home now. He's 90 years old. He's got a girlfriend. She's 86. He stays over at her house periodically. I ain't quizzed him on anything, but he's always been, and every time I see him just before he leaves, he's heard to come to hear me talk a couple times in Nebraska. But every time just before we leave, I always just get a couple minutes with him, and it's kind of like, I don't know, not exactly like, but it's almost like a blessing, you know. But the last time I was there, it's just been a few months, so I was talking to him, and he said he's gotten almost everything right in the years I know. He didn't get this right, but there's no sense in wouldn't be worth telling him. He said, your best bet is just continue with what you've been doing. He said, you went there and you got help. We're there being Alcoholics Anonymous. You went there and you got help, and you've stayed there and you've given back more than you got. Well, that's impossible. He got that wrong. That's absolutely impossible. What Alcoholics Anonymous has given me, I would have settled for table scraps, and what I got was a seat at the table with the king. So I appreciate your listening, and thank you for my life.